Okay, let's picture this. A world, maybe not that long ago, where huge calculations meant, well, endless hours of manual work.
Uh-huh. Slide rules, adding machines, maybe chalkboards full of numbers.
Exactly. And the sheer mental effort, the risk of one tiny mistake throwing everything off. It's hard to truly grasp now, isn't it?
It really is a totally different era of problem solving.
But right in the middle of that era, you had this guy, John Vincent Atanasoff, son of an immigrant father, a Bulgarian who'd fled hardship, and his mother, a school teacher. So, that mix of resilience and education right there.
That's a fascinating background.
And he looked at all that manual calculation, all that grinding work, and basically asked, is there a better way? Could a machine do this? Not just faster, but fundamentally differently.
A pretty bold question for the time.
So today we're diving deep into Atanasoff's story, using the sources you sent us. It's about the birth of the digital age, really.
Yeah, and it's not just about inventing a machine. The sources show it's got twists, controversy, even a bit of courtroom drama later on.
Definitely. It's quite the journey. So let's unpack it. Where do the sources start us off? His early life, right? Born 1903.
Right. And you mentioned his parents, his father, Ivan, an electrical engineer eventually, and his mother, Iva, the teacher. That combination seems key.
Yeah, the sources suggest it really fueled his curiosity. And he was, well, bright doesn't quite cover it, does it?
Apparently not. Mastering a slide rule by age 9, tackling logarithms shortly after, that's unusual.
And this wasn't in some, privileged, high-tech environment. This was early 20th century, moving around, including Florida for a time. Modest circumstance.
But clearly a massive drive to learn.
Oh, yeah. The sources mentioned he blew through high school in just 2 years, just hungry for knowledge.
And to really get why he was so driven towards a new kind of calculation, we need to understand what he was up against, technology-wise.
Okay, yeah. What were the state-of-the-art calculators then?
Well, he was dealing with complex math and physics problems, right? Things needing lots of calculations. The best tools were analog machines, like differential analyzers.
Analog meaning?
Meaning they worked by modeling quantities physically, like using voltages or rotating shaft to represent numbers. They were clever, but inherently approximate.
Ah, okay. Not perfectly precise.
Exactly. They were good for some things, but for solving large systems of linear equations, the kind of thing Atanasoff needed for his physics work, they weren't ideal. They were prone to errors, mechanical slippage, voltage fluctuations.
So basically too slow and too fuzzy for the really hard problems he was tackling.
Precisely. The frustration was building. These tools just weren't sharp enough.
And that frustration, according to the sources, leads him to this this foundational question.
Right. He starts thinking, instead of modeling numbers physically, what if a machine could handle them abstractly, using pure logic?
Logic. Like yes or no, on or off.
Exactly. Could a machine operate using discrete states, not continuous variables? Could it think, essentially, in binary?
And this brings us to that famous story, the one that feels like it's straight out of a movie script.
The Drive, yeah. Winter 1937.
He's driving across Iowa, apparently totally stuck on this problem, just churning it over, getting nowhere, feeling the limits of everything available.
Just complete mental block.
Yeah.
Frustrated.
And then he pulls over, doesn't have the breakthrough at his desk or in the lab.
No.
No, he stops somewhere in a bar in Illinois.
It sounds almost unbelievable, but that's what the accounts say. He needed to clear his head, ended up there, and suddenly, clarity.
Amazing. So what clicked in that Illinois bar? What were the key ideas?
It seems like several distinct concepts suddenly fused together for him. Your sources pinpoint 3 main things.
Okay.
First, using binary arithmetic, zeros and ones, getting away from base 10 or analog representation. Simple, fundamental.
Makes sense. Computers today still use binary.
Second, using electronic switches, vacuum tubes, specifically to actually perform the calculations, much, much faster than clunky mechanical relays or gears.
Right, speed was crucial.
And third, a way to store those binary digits electronically. He conceived of using capacitors, tiny electrical components, in a regenerative system, meaning it could hold the memory actively.
Wow. So binary math, electronic speed, and electronic memory. All clicking together in a bar.
Yeah. He saw how these elements could form a machine based purely on electronic logic, manipulating those zeros and ones. It was a complete shift from the analog way of thinking.
So he's got this blueprint, this lightning strike of an idea. He heads back to Iowa State University.
And he doesn't go it alone. He finds a collaborator.
Clifford Berry. The sources describe him as this brilliant graduate student, essential partner, it seems.
Absolutely. And together, they actually start building this thing. This wasn't just theory anymore.
Right. Between 1939 and 1942, working pretty much under the radar, right? In obscurity, as one source puts it.
Very much so. They built a small proof-of-concept prototype first, managed to get a small grant.
Pennies, really, compared to later projects.
Oh, absolutely tiny. And then they built the full machine, the Atanasoff-Berry computer, the ABC.
Building something nobody else had really conceived of yet, based on those principles from the Illinois bar.
And its design was revolutionary for the time. It had elements of parallel processing, that regenerative capacitor memory was incredibly innovative. It used electronic logic gates.
Yeah.
They were laying down the fundamental architecture.
It sounds like they were on the cusp of something huge. But
Then the world changed. World War II.
Yeah. Atanasoff gets called away. His expertise was needed for the war effort, right? At the Naval Ordnance Lab.
That's right. Vital work, obviously, but it meant leaving Iowa State.
And leaving the ABC. The sources say it was basically just left, unfinished, sitting in a basement.
Gathering dust. The project abandoned. It must have been heartbreaking, in a way. The dream seemingly dead on the vine.
But the story doesn't stop there, does it? Because before the war, before he left, there was a visitor.
Ah, yes. This is crucial. In 1940, John Mauchly comes to Iowa State.
Mauchly, who later becomes very famous
For ENIAC,
Hmm.
the machine generally credited for decades as the first electronic digital computer.
Okay, so Mauchly visits Atanasoff in 1940. And the sources are clear. He doesn't just chat with Atanasoff. He sees the ABC.
He sees it operating, he gets a detailed explanation of its principles.
And importantly, he leaves with detailed notes, written materials about the ABC's design.
Correct. That visit is a key point in this whole narrative.
So fast forward a few years, the war is over, and Mauchly, now working with J. Presp Record, unveils ENIAC.
Right. ENIAC was huge, expensive, a major government project, very impressive engineering for its time. And it gets all the headlines, world's first electronic brain, that kind of thing.
And Atanasoff.
Yeah.
And the ABC.
Pretty much. Silence. His work done earlier, done on a shoestring budget, interrupted by the war.
Yeah.
It just sort of faded from view. The narrative became ENIAC's.
How does that happen? I mean, the sources raise this question about credit and recognition, don't they?
They do. It's complex. Is the inventor the person with the first core idea, the first working prototype, or the first person to build something widely used or publicized? ENIAC was undeniably influential and widely known. The ABC wasn't.
But it feels, well, unjust reading these accounts. Mostly saw the ABC, took notes, then bills ENIAC based on similar principles.
It certainly raises serious questions about the flow of ideas and proper attribution. Was ENIAC truly the first? Or was it heavily influenced, perhaps fundamentally enabled, by Atanasoff's prior undocumented work?
That question hung in the air for decades, didn't it, while ENIAC got the glory?
For a very long time, yes. The ABC remained a footnote, if mentioned at all.
But then the story takes another turn. Decades later, in a courtroom.
Yes, the 1970s, a major patent lawsuit, Honeywell versus Sperry Rand. Sperry Rand held the patents derived from the ENIAC work.
And Honeywell challenged those patents, and who do they call to testify?
John Vincent Atanasoff. Finally, a formal venue to tell his story, under oath.
He presented his evidence, the design documents, his recollections, details about Mauchly's visit.
Exactly. All the details of the ABC's design, its operation back in 1940-42, Mauchly's visit, it all came out.
And the judge. What was the conclusion?
The judge, Earl R. Lurson, issued a landmark ruling in 1973. Your sources emphasize how clear it was.
What did he say?
He ruled that Eckert and Mauchly did not themselves first invent the automatic electronic digital computer,
Wow.
but instead derived that subject matter from one Dr. John Vincent Atanasoff. He explicitly invalidated the key ENIAC patents on those grounds.
So the court basically said, ENIAC came from the ABC. The ABC was the first.
That was the legal finding, yes. The first electronic digital computer was the Atanasoff-Berry computer.
Imagine the feeling for Atanasoff. After 30 years of seeing ENIAC celebrated, of his own work being ignored, to finally have that official recognition.
It must have been an immense sense of vindication, justice, delayed for decades, but finally delivered, the historical record corrected.
The story didn't end with the dusty machine in the basement. It ended with the truth coming out.
And it's interesting your sources note that Atanasoff himself, he wasn't really seeking fame or fortune from this. He continued inventing, teaching, contributing in other ways throughout his life.
It wasn't about the glory for him.
It seems not. More about the intellectual challenge, the satisfaction of solving the problem. The recognition was important for the historical truth. But his legacy was growing quietly anyway, like that source said, like a seed planted in fertile soil.
That's a great way to put it. So when we look back at this whole saga laid out in the sources, the frustration, the bar idea, the obscure building phase, the war, the controversy, the final vindication, what's the big takeaway? What does his journey teach us listening today?
Well, I think the sources really highlight how messy innovation can be. It's not always linear. It's not always fair in the short term.
Right, ideas can be ahead of their time or get interrupted by world events.
Exactly. And credit doesn't always go where it's initially due. Being first with the idea isn't always the same as being recognized first. It really underscores the importance of, well, documenting your work.
Huh. Yes, maybe keep good notes, unlike perhaps Moshli's use of his notes, but also perseverance. Right.
Oh, absolutely. Atanasoff faced setbacks, saw his work seemingly eclipsed, but the fundamental soundness of his ideas eventually won through. It speaks volumes about sticking with it.
One of the sources used that great metaphor. Innovation is often a lonely road, paved with failure, frustration, but...
Ultimately worth traveling, yes. His story is proof of that.
And that seed metaphor you mentioned. His idea, the ABC, was the seed. It faced storms, the war, being forgotten, the shadow of Ian.
But the seed was viable. It contained the core DNA of digital computing. And eventually it broke through the ground and its principles blossomed into, well, everything we rely on today.
It really is the seed of our entire digital age. So let's bring it back to you, our listener, thinking about Atanasoff's story from these sources.
Yeah, what does it make you think about? The sources leave us with this really provocative question, almost a challenge.
Which is?
So what will you do when your moment comes, when you stand at the crossroads of doubt and possibility?
Yeah.
Will you turn back or will you
Right.
press on like Atanasoff?
Will you push forward with that quiet conviction, even if the path isn't clear, even if recognition seems far off?
It's a powerful thought. Believing in your idea when maybe few others do.
It reminds us that huge revolutions can start small. A frustration, an insight in an unexpected place, the courage to build something new. The next big shift could start with any of us right now.
Absolutely. Dare to dream, dare to build. That seems to be the enduring lesson from John Atanasoff.